Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game was filmed at Multizone, and I'm playing Ramos, keeping Prairie Stream, Cultivate, Farseek, Rootbound Crag, Naya Charm, Temple of Malice, and Elusive Tormentor. Maximus is back playing Bruse Tarl and Kediss, keeping Auroch Steelshaper, Battlefield Forge, Fabled Passage, Mountain, Exotic Orchard, Sword of the Anime, and Deflecting Palm. New to the channel is Git, playing her Fynn the Fangbearer deck, and she keeps Haze of Pollen, Thornwheeled Archer, Bower Passage, Golden Urn, Fang of Shigeki, and 2 forests. Kevin has built his Sophina and Wernog deck, keeping a Thriving Heath, Temple of Malice, Loyal Unicorn, Faithless Looting, Ruthless Technomancer, and Heliod's Intervention. I win the die roll and start us off. I play a tapped Temple of Malice, scrying 1. Kevin follows my lead, playing his own Temple of Malice, and scries 1 as well. Maximus just plays a Battlefield Forge. Git plays a Forest and casts Golden Urn. I play tap Steam Vents and pass. Kevin has a Thriving Heath and names black as it comes in tapped. Maximus has a Mountain and casts Kediss. Git adds another counter to her urn and plays a Forest. She then brings out Fynn and passes. I play a Rootbound Crag and cast Cultivate, going to find a Plains for the field and a basic to my hand. Kevin plays a Mountain and casts Triumphant Adventurer. He then casts Faithless Looting, drawing 2 and discarding 2. Maximus draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He taps 2 for an Auroch Steelshaper, and then goes to combat. Kediss then hits me for 1, which also has Kediss dealing 1 to Kevin and 1 to Git. Git adds a counter to her urn and draws. She plays a Forest and casts Fang of Shigeki and Thornwheel Archer. She then hits me with Fynn, and I take 1 commander damage and gain 2 poison counters, and she passes turn. I have a Clifftop Retreat for turn, and tap 2 mana for Farseek. I grab a Stomping Grounds, and then cast Swiftfoot Boots. I pass after that. Kevin plays a Command Tower and casts Loyal Unicorn. He moves to combat and swings the Adventurer at Git. She takes the hit, and Kevin ventures into the dungeon. He picks Lost Mine of Phandelver and scraps 1. Maximus has a Fabled Passage for turn, and sacrifices it for a Plains. He then casts a Pure Steel Paladin, and follows up with Sword of the Anime, drawing from the Paladin trigger. Kediss then hits me for another 1, and Kevin and Git take 1 as well. Git adds a counter to her urn, draws, and plays a Tajuru Blightblade. She then plays out her Bower's Passage, and then swings her team at me. This has me taking 3 damage, 1 of which is Commander, but more importantly, gaining 6 more poison counters. I draw and play a Swamp. I tap 4 for an Elusive Tormentor, and then equip the Swiftfoot Boots to it before passing to Kevin. Kevin plays a Swamp and brings out Sophina. He goes to combat and resolves the Loyal Unicorn trigger to give us Stuff Vigilance and prevent all combat damage. We make a bit of a mistake at this point, and he swings them both at Git. She blocks the Unicorn and takes the hit from the Adventurer, which lets Kevin venture further, making a treasure. This is where we make the 2 small mistakes, the first being that Sophina has to attack to get the clues, which we do catch later on, and the second, that the Loyal Unicorn dies to Death Touch. In his second main phase, Kevin then sacrifices a treasure and taps enough for a Wernog. As his second commander comes in, he asks if we want a clue or to lose 1 life, and we all pick to lose 1. Maximus casts a Felwar Stone, and then an Arcane Signet. He gears up Kediss with a Sword of the Anime, and goes to combat. This time he goes at Git, and goes to find a basic. She then takes the hit for 3. This has Kediss dealing 3 to Kevin and I, and Maximus then passes. Git draws, and plays a Forest. She swings at Maximus, who takes 3 damage plus gains 4 poison counters. She then passes, and at her end step, I discard Prairie Stream to transform my Elusive Tormentor into an Insidious Mist. I draw and cast Ramos in my main phase, and then move the Swiftfoot Boots over to him. I then play a tap Temple Garden, and ship the turn to Kevin. Kevin has a Vault of Whispers for turn, and plays out the Word Soup in combat, Audric, Lunarch Marshal. He goes to combat, and everything gains Menace, First Strike, and Death Touch. Sophina goes at Maximus, and Wernog and the Adventurer go at Git. Sophina triggers, giving Kevin 2 more clues, and Kevin also gets to continue venturing, this time giving Fynn -4/-0 until Kevin's next turn. Maximus untaps and draws. He casts a Forebearer's Blade in his main phase and equips it onto Kediss. He swings Kediss a Git, and he goes to find a basic from attacking with the Sword of the Animus trigger. Git blocks with Fynn, but still takes 2 commander damage. This has Kevin and I also taking 2. In Maximus' second main phase, he casts a Joyra's Toolbox and passes turn. Git adds a counter to her urn and draws. She recasts Fynn and asks for what everyone has as blockers. Unfortunately, with no good lines of attack, she just passes with her army of Death Touch blockers at the ready. I play Temple of Silence and Scry 1, and then mutate a Boneyard Lurker onto Ramos. This has Ramos gaining 2 +1/+1 counters, and I get to return the Prairie Stream to hand. I then hit Maximus for 6 in the air with my commander, and pass to Kevin. Kevin untaps and draws. He goes to combat, and Audric shares the wealth with Menace, First Strike, and Death Touch. He swings Audric at me, Sophina at Maximus, and the adventure goes at Git once more. None of us block, and Kevin gets a card, and they then connect, and he gets to draw a card as he completes the Lost Mine. He plays a Swamp in his post-combat main phase, and remembers to add his clue tokens from Sophina's attack. He casts a Clock of Omens, and is able to tap some clues to untap the Vault of Whispers a few times for some black mana. He then casts a Wayfarer's Bauble and a Felwar Stone, and passes. Maximus casts a Bloodthirsty Blade, and then brings out Bruse, giving Kediss Double Strike and Lifelink. He then goes to combat, and swings Kediss at Kevin. This lets him go and find a basic from the Sword of the Animus trigger, and Kevin responds, using his untapped clues to untap the vault, and then uses some white to help cast a Heliod's Intervention, where X is 3. He targets Maximus' swords and my boots. Maximus pays to regenerate the Forebearer's Blade. The spell then resolves and the things are destroyed, and Kevin moves to block with Wernog, but still takes 6. This has Kediss dealing 6 to Git and I, while also gaining Maximus 20 life. With nothing else, he passes. Git adds a counter to her urn and draws, asking what we're going to do about Maximus. I agree to help her, and cast Naya Charm, tapping down all of Maximus' creatures, plus giving Ramos 3 +1/+1 counters. This makes Git's decision easy, as she swings all 3 of her creatures at Maximus, giving him the final 6 poison counters he needs to get taken out. My turn has me drawing, swinging Ramos at Kevin, dealing 9, and passing turn. Kevin untaps and draws. He cracks a clue to draw a card, and flashes back the Faithless Looting, drawing 2 and discarding 2. He plays a Great Furnace, which will work well with his Clock of Omens and the clue tokens, and then goes to combat, swinging at me for 8. Before they connect, he gets to make some clue tokens for Sophina, and I then take the full 8. He gets to venture again, going back into the Lost Dungeon, and scrying 1. He then does his land untap trick with the clock and clues, and sacrifices a clue to draw a card. He then plays Nadir's Nightblade, and passes. Git ticks up her urn on her upkeep, and gets a closer look at my Insidious Mist. She casts Devouring Tendrils to try and take out the Nightblade, but Kevin responds by cracking a clue. This has Git and I losing 1, while Kevin gains 1 from the Nightblade trigger. He can't find a way to save it though, and the Nightblade gets taken out while Git gains 2. She then goes to combat, and deals 4 damage to Kevin, and gives him 6 poison counters, and passes to me. I draw and play a Swamp, having hit pretty much only lands this entire game. I then just pass turn as I'm likely to either die from Kevin or Git if I attack. Kevin untaps and draws. He plays a Plains and goes to combat. Sophina and the Adventurer go at Git, and Kevin makes 2 clue tokens before she takes the hit, and then makes a treasure as he ventures further into the Lost Mine of Phandelver. In his second main phase, he casts God Eternal Bontu, and in response to the Enter the Battlefield trigger, taps 4 clues to untap his Great Furnace and Vault of Whispers. He sacrifices those tapped clues and the bauble to Bontu, drawing 5. Once he's done that, Kevin overloads a Winds of Abandon, and Git and I exile our creatures and go to find that many basics. Git adds another counter to her urn and draws. She plays out a Hornet Queen, making 4 insect tokens with Death Touch, and passes to me. I draw and play Sacred Foundry, passing. Kevin uses some of his untapped clues to untap his artifact lands, and then taps them for mana to sacrifice a clue and draw a card. Kevin untaps and draws for turn. He then uses the improvisability of a Herald of Anguish to help tap some artifacts to help cast it. Once it's resolved, he activates it to take out the Hornet Queen, then a token, and then a third token. Moving to combat, his team gets a bunch of abilities, and he swings them at Git for 13. He makes 4 clue tokens as he attacks, and she takes the hint since Menace and Flying makes things hard to block. Git adds another counter to her urn, and draws. She plays a forest, and recasts Fynn. She feels pretty good with the Bower Passage being out, but Kevin activates the Herald 2 more times and takes out the Flying Insects with Death Touch. With nothing else, she passes. I untap and draw. I play a Hinterland Harbor and cast Ramos in my main phase, passing to Kevin. Kevin draws for turn and has to decide whether to take me out or Git. He drops out an Ishin and moves to combat. He swings enough at Git to take her out even with the urn, and has the Herald going at me. I use Beast Within to take out the Herald, and Kevin gains 10 clue tokens from Ishin doubling Sophina's on attack trigger. Ramos also gains a +1/+1 counter. Git is then taken out, and in his second main phase, Kevin cracks a clue to draw a card, and then taps some other ones to help crack another one. And then taps some clues to help untap his artifact lands to help crack another one. He then does it a third time, drawing a third card, and passes to me. I untap and draw. I get very excited as I think I found a line to win, and I mutate Vadrock onto Ramos, giving him 3 more +1/+1 counters. This lets me cast a Naya Charm from my graveyard, picking the mode to tap down all of Kevin's creatures. Kevin responds using his clues to untap his artifact lands, and then sacrifices a clue to draw a card. I get to add another 3 +1/+1 counters from the Naya Charm to Ramos, and moving to combat, go at Kevin. At this point, I realize only too late that it'll only be enough to put him to 20 commander damage and not the critical 21, and I know when I'm beat, and scoop it up to Kevin. Game review time. So, like in many aspects of my life, math has once more reared its ugly head to ruin things. It was brutal to be 1 point of commander damage short, but at the same time, Kevin's clue deck really popped off. It was incredible to see the amount of value he was gaining, and that Clock of Omens, being able to tap down his clues to untap his artifact lands, was chef's kiss beautiful. I was really excited when Git sat down with her Fynn deck, because I haven't actually seen the commander in action. Fynn seems like an interesting commander in that you want to run Death Touch creatures, which means you can trade up pretty easily, but at the same time, he forces your opponents to have to block, otherwise you're going to take a lot of poison damage very quickly. Maximus learned this the hard way after presenting himself as the big villain of the game, because Kediss was doing so much damage to all of his opponents. Plus all that life gain just kind of made him into a giant threat that needed to be dealt with. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.